support and inclusive design at KCAT. As I'm sure you've seen by now, our design thinking class is putting together a student exhibition featuring work that focuses on inclusive and accessible design. So if you feel like any of your projects have touched on social justice, environmental justice, accessibility, or anything else you feel relates to inclusive design, please don't hesitate to submit your work. We have flyers out everywhere with QR codes. It can be in any stage. It doesn't need to be like super finished or like this huge project. We're taking really anything. And we hope to put on a workshop to help you guys develop your work for an exhibition. I would also like to let you know about our next scheduled speaker, Grace Dixon. She's going to be here on October 16th, which is a Thursday. She's an adjunct professor at KCAT and an industrial designer. We're really excited to hear what she has to say. Hope you guys can make it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Bill Robinson. He's spent over 25 years at the intersection of design thinking, futures thinking, and leadership. He co-founded Further Degree in 2016, a strategy and innovation studio in Grand Rapids, where he helps organizations untangle complexity and design resilient futures. His work spans across nonprofits, corporations, and public institutions, from strategic planning to inclusive community design. Bill's career includes leadership at Herman Miller, Fabri-Cal, and community initiatives like TEDx Grand Rapids and Art Prize. Today, he's going to be talking about his work with the Kent County Access Collaborative. And his talk titled, How Might We Create Roadmaps for Inclusion. So please give a warm hand for Bill Robinson.
Hi, everybody. Let's see if I can get this on real quick here. Thanks for having me today.
The tech works. We've been working it.
It did work earlier.
Come with patience.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. All right. Okay. I gotta make sure that I keep touching this over and over again so this is going to sleep. Thanks for having me today. I know some of you from Gail's classes. I don't know a whole bunch of the rest of you, so
Yeah.
hey there. I want to talk about this idea of frameworks for inclusion. I want to tell you a little story, and then I want to talk a little bit about how I want to frame what I want to say today, too, I think, for a sec. As was said, I'm with this firm called Further Degree. Further Degree is essentially my wife and I and a bunch of contractors. We've been doing this work together for 9 years. Through the pandemic, actually, we got really involved in early childhood education, too. And she's off doing that, working on a project for a new Montessori and a new public school that have been launched this year. And I have been left to my own devices, working on kind of some of these other projects. I got pulled into, the story is, Dave Lukowski, who's the executive director at Disability Advocates. I've been friends with him for a long time. We've always wanted to figure out a way to work together. And he had a small project in 2022. He said, hey, I know you facilitate things from time to time. Can you facilitate a thing for me? And I was like, awesome, that would be great. I said, what's the thing? He's like, well, we've been working with the Metro 6, which are the 6 municipalities in Kent County that all support the Rapid. So I've been working with these folk, and we want to bring them together on a regular basis to talk about accessibility. We want to talk about wins. We want to talk about challenges. We want to talk about aspirations, and it would be great if we could get everybody in the room together to do this and kind of leverage each other's experiences. And I said that'd be awesome. Can I talk to all of those people before we do a facilitation? And he said sure. So I set up meetings with city managers and mayors and those kinds of folk from all 6 of those communities, and I asked them a bunch of questions. What do you think about disability advocates? What's your relationship with the ADA? What's your plan around that? What are your aspirations? And what do you think about coming together? And essentially the answer was, we love disability advocates, We know we need to get better around accessibility, and that the ADA is just is a baseline for everything, but we don't know how to do it. And so we really need someone to tell us how do we become more accessible as a community on the whole. And oh, by the way, we don't have time for yet another meeting. We get involved in meetings all the live one day, and we get double and triple booked, and we really want to pay attention to this. Isn't there something else you can do? And so I heard all that and went, oh, okay, this is not going to be a project around facilitation. This is going to be something completely else. What am I hearing from these communities? And the bottom line on this is what we were hearing is that they want to be led. They want a roadmap. They didn't understand what beyond ADA compliance was, what it looked like, what it could be, and they want to be told a story. They want a narrative to be able to follow. And we went, okay, let's figure out what that might look like. Now, the caveat on all of this is I have no expertise in inclusion. I don't do policy work in that space. I wouldn't call myself an expert in inclusive design either, but I'd refer to myself as a naive optimist, which I think is a quality. If you guys are thinking about your design practices after you graduate, I think being a naive optimist is like a really good character trait and a place to start. Naive optimism means that you're not thinking about the work that you're doing in a cynical fashion. You're always thinking about possibility. You're always thinking about the future. It doesn't mean that you're being blind to those kinds of things that could negatively impact your work, but you're not letting those challenges get in the way, right? So you're always kind of thinking about what's possible. And I should also say, so I've been a naive optimist for kind of my whole career. I've been really leaning into that lately, just kind of as a trait. One of the things along those lines that is actually related to this work is how much do you guys know of like speculative design or futures thinking work? Any hands?
A little bit.
No, a little bit. Have you guys ever seen the futures cone before? Okay, so this is where you write notes. There's a thing called the futures cone, and where do I have it? Just a second. That's one version of it. Here's a cleaner version of it. That's not the screen that I want. Let's try this again. Okay, I'm going to use a different image. So this is the futures cone. That little point on the end is now. Coming this way is time, and the concept is pretty straightforward. As you think about the future, there are a number of categories that you can consider. There's the stuff that is outside of what's possible, called preposterous. These are things that we think of as like fantasy and really, really far-flung science fiction. There are things that are possible, future knowledge, things that might actually happen given certain circumstances. There are things that are plausible, right? We're going from this like huge range of possibility, and we continue to kind of narrow it down. So there's plausible. With our current knowledge, these are things that can happen. There's projected future, which kind of falls in line with probable. If we look backwards, if we use kind of inductive reasoning, we can kind of guess the things that are going to happen. So these are the things that we consider as probable. And in fact, most of our businesses, most organizations pay attention only to this probable front, right? It feels like it's the least risky. Right? So, you're saying, well, these things have happened before, people have responded this way before, we've had successes like this before, so we're always going to continue to focus on that. And that gives us a real limiting kind of perspective on what the future can be, right? And so what I like is that there's this other field called preferable. And I like to focus on the preferable because that's taking a look, a speculative look into the future and saying, what is it that we want? How do we want the world to work? How do we want our organizations to interact? What do we want our communities to be like? And then saying, based on that, how did we get there, and what kind of actions do we need to take today? Right? Pretty straightforward. And if you believe in Buddhist thought, there is no past, there is no future, there's only the present. And if we start to talk about things like the future like this, it's going to infect the way that we think about our current actions, and it's going to move us on the path towards that preferable future. So just by talking about it and saying about it, slowly moves us in that path. So this is the preferable space. So in thinking about the preferable space, and thinking about this challenge of how can we help cities become more accessible, we started to develop this framework around inclusion, and essentially the idea was this. Essentially the idea is this. If we could create roadmaps for cities, if we could help them understand exactly where they are today, and give them an idea about what their next move is, and what the next move is, and what the next move is, and paint a picture for them is what a transformational city might look like with regard to accessibility, that would be a really great thing to do. This is all speculative though, so this hasn't been tested yet. It's in the process of being tested, but I want to show you a little bit about some of the work that we're kind of doing and the speculation that we're having in this space, and what our kind of process looks like moving forward. And so in thinking about this overall framework, we've done some initial research around kind of aspects of life in a community. We call them domains of belonging. Right now we've got public spaces and mobility, things like health and well-being, communication, economic opportunity as kind of categories that folk who live in communities and folk that support communities think about, right? They're experts in each one of these spaces. And we also think about what are their stages of capacity. So where are they today with regard to kind of an overall roadmap of moving to kind of a transformational capacity? Where are they in the spectrum? Are they just beginning? Have they developed some capacity? Are they having some successes along the way? And the basic notion is can we start with by understanding a baseline? Can we do an assessment at a municipal level to understand where they are, use language that isn't punitive for the city. We should be using punitive languages for cities that are only ADA compliant, because I think as Dave from Disability Advocates says ADA compliance is the worst you can legally do. And so let's figure out ways to get past that. But there, understanding where a city is gives an opportunity to tell a story about what their next step might be. It gives them a narrative to talk about what would beyond ADA compliance look like. How would you move forward? How would you collect resources kind of for each one of those capacities? How would you measure it? And so the basic idea that we started with, so this is still off of the work where Dave asked for me to do a facilitation, and instead of coming back with a plan for what that facilitation would look like, I came back with this and said, cities don't want this. They don't want the facilitation, they want this. They want leadership, and here's a way you might go about providing leadership. So I was speculating. This is a whole guess. And what you do with this guess along the way, tying a line like how might you do this, is you get feedback. I presented this to Dave and some others at Disability Advocates, and they went, oh, well, that's interesting. maybe that makes some sense. I don't know. And they presented it to some other folk within their overall network, and they went, oh, well, that's interesting. We haven't really talked about moving accessibility forward in kind of the lens of inclusion. Maybe that's interesting. How would you go about doing this? And so we started to kind of design further. We said, well, we not only need these kind of domains of belonging and these stages to move folk along, but we need a process to engage a municipality or a large organization, an institution with. What would that look like? We developed a simple 4-step process. And the process is assess. Are we going to assess where folk are today? Which means that this whole process is going to require us developing an assessment, a large-scale assessment. Think about an assessment across all of those domains being rolled out in the city of Grand Rapids or Kentwood or Traverse City or any municipality. Based on the assessment, folk need to figure out. Folk need to figure out. Folk need to define what's important to them. So our imagining in this whole process is that we would give them an assessment and we would say, you're doing really well in transportation, not so well in housing, not so well in health and well-being, communication is okay, right? We give them a list of things. And then we talk with them and we would engage their community in saying, who do you want to be as a community with regard to accessibility? How do you want to be known? How do you want to support other folk in your community? And we do a futures thinking exercise where we would get the community to speculate about their future. And they would essentially, through that activity, start to identify, well, what are your values? What are the things that you actually want to align monies toward? What do you want to start to pay for? And that would give us an idea of the domain to focus on, and areas to basically start to make some progress. And so we would essentially then help them define what their priorities are. Based upon defining priorities, we would go through an activation phase and saying, can we help you actually activate the space? Is there work that we can do or work with our partners on creating policy, like around transportation? Are there physical recommendations that we can give, working with other partners and doing assessments on mass transit or around housing or any other things? To give them a plan, and we would have them execute that plan for a period of time, and then we would go through a measurement phase. So assess, define, activate, and measure. And once we measure, we go all the way back to the beginning again, because the measurement is an assessment, and we say, how do we activate more things for you? So this is the speculation of an engagement, right? It's a guess as to, it's an offering as to how a city or a large institution like a Ferris or a Corwell or any of those organizations might think about getting the entirety of accessibility and inclusion kind of in one place to be able to manage kind of all of their thinking about it. Often when it comes to accessibility or inclusion, it's language that's in city master plans, and it might be in a businesses' yearly reports. It might come up in some of their value language, but they're not necessarily doing a really great job of kind of connecting the dots and putting all of that under one roof. And so this is an opportunity to celebrate work that's happening, make sure that kind of areas of belonging aren't getting missed out, and gives them more efficiency and efficacy in thinking about how to move accessibility forward. So that model we presented last summer to other centers for independent living, which Disability Advocates is one of those. I think there are 15 others of those in the state. presented the concept to them, to their leadership, and they all went, yes, that's how we want to work with cities. We don't want to be called after a project's already rolling. We want to be brought in on the strategy side of things. You know, we don't want to be staff augmentation, right? We don't have people that are doing accessibility work on our payroll. We don't want to do that stuff. We want to be involved in the strategy work. So they said yes to that. I was like, oh, you're saying yes to that. I made this up, right? Because I'm a naive optimist. There's something to do with the fact that I'm a cis white guy too, that I think I can walk into any room and say something important and people are going to listen. So I've got that on my side. That I'm trying to be, I'm trying to honor that privilege in this process though too, by making sure that as we're kind of going back and asking folk what they think about this process, that we include an ever-widening and much more inclusive group of folk to be able to measure and offer perspective and be involved in the entire process. And so what that looks like right now is that over the course of the last year, we've amassed a list of subject matter experts in each one of these domains. And I've been facilitating meetings with disability advocates. Man, this does not work well. I've been working with disability advocates on facilitating those sessions and kind of presenting the model. What do y'all think? My assumption has been all along the way that this is just something for folk to react to. Somebody's going to say no. Somebody's going to say this is just fundamentally wrong. This is a bad idea. That hasn't happened yet. So I've been building. I've been listening and getting feedback. I've been trying to listen as wide as possible. We've been listening to the subject matter experts. We've also been engaging with disability advocates, test pilots, folk with varying levels of disability who want to offer perspective from their lived experience into the mix, and I've been asking them about this. What does that look like for them? Does this make sense for them? And we've been learning all along the way. A lot of the work that I did, well, and I should say in all of this too. So this is a really small project that Dave asked me to do. This has turned into like a really big thing now on a really, really small budget. And so all of this work has just been like a couple hours at a time every couple weeks and just kind of cranking through. It's learning, it's trying not to drop the work, it's trying to be excited about this preferable future that we're trying to create here. And sometimes that's what your work looks like. Sometimes your work is just like picking away one thing at a time and trying to say what's the next right thing to do. And that's been this. We've had a couple of sessions with subject matter experts. The last session that we had was to go over the stages of capacity that I created. Each one of these stages of capacity, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, by the way, these domains of belonging look like this. So public spaces as shared commons. I have a description for this and a vision for the future for each one of these. So we're always looking to the future with this. So vision for the future. Imagine a municipality where every public space is an invitation to connect. Parks feature adaptive seating, sensory-friendly zones, and intergenerational play spaces. Libraries and cultural centers serve as gathering spaces or places where diverse perspectives are shared. Sidewalks are wide and free of obstructions, allowing people of all abilities to move freely. Every space is a signal of welcome, not just an afterthought for accessibility. So every one of these has that kind of a future tale. And as we've had some initial conversations with cities, you can't say no to that, right? I mean, these are even in the existing political climate, these are things that are fairly well accepted by a lot of folk. In fact, I mean, more broadly so, I think this framework for inclusion should go across not just thinking about accessibility, but any other place where inclusion is important. But politically, most likely, accessibility is a really great place to start. It is a nonpartisan topic. Everybody gets old. Everybody knows somebody in a wheelchair or who has a visual impairment, and it is a universal human condition that folk are willing to spend money on. And so we're starting here, and I believe that this can expand, much more broadly as to how cities treat their citizenry or engage in their citizenry better. But every single one of these has a vision for the future. The capacities, so emerging capacities, these are all narrative driven as well. The idea behind these capacities, kind of this roadmap, is to tell a story. If I'm in the integrated capacity, what's the main thing that I'm hearing from an institutional perspective? Belonging is becoming a part of how we work. It's a thing that I should be listening to if we're going in and we're doing assessments. I should be hearing things like that. We might also hear inclusion is a part of every department's work now. We've tied our budget to our inclusion priorities. People can see and feel difference, right? From an institutional perspective, these are the things that we want to hear folks that are, city employees, people that are providing services within large institutions. They should be saying these things. This should be a part of their work. But their perspective is only one of those pieces. The other piece that we're paying attention to is what's the lived experience. So even though a city, a municipality is maybe providing a service, is that service actually doing the way it's intended? So there should be a measurement around what the lived experience looks like as well. So things like, feeling of the lived experience, people should feel considered at this capacity. People feel like their needs are accounted for, even if not always perfectly met. There's growing trust that the institution gets it. So again, speculation as to what the future could look like, a narrative around everything. And so I've engaged with the subject matter experts on this part this summer. We engaged with the test pilots on this part this summer too. And surprisingly, everybody continues to say, "Oh, this resonates. This is something that we can act on. Say more. Can you give us more detail?" So I said, "Cool. Let's give them more detail." This is a. What did I show here? If this is a part of that framework, and we have a roadmap, so public spaces. If it's in an emerging capacity, I should have measurements or things to look for from an institutional perspective and from a lived experience perspective. And we should do that for every single one of these categories. And so I'm spending time, or have spent time this summer making guesses on what that could look like. So for public spaces, under the capacity of emerging capacity, I've got a number of categories that I think might be important, and a number of things that could be measured or things that we might be looking for in that community. So on the policy and planning side of things, so this is just the not an exciting one. Let's go to developing. So policy and planning, accessibility is added to guidelines. Pilot projects are budgeted, right? Universal design has been mentioned, right? It's a step. Measurements and accountability. First citywide audit. Tracking percentage of accessible parks, annual but not public reporting perhaps, right? These are all things on a path. But this is just for institutional capacity. I've also been thinking about, well, what's the lived experience look like? Ease of use. Parts of parks now accessible. Restroom entrances are easier. Transit stops have added shelters. What's the emotional tone? People should start feeling acknowledged. They should feel some relief at improvements. but there's still ongoing frustration everywhere. I've taken a guess at all of these and created 1,200 stickies. If you ever use Miro, once you get to 1,200 stickies, the system starts to bog down. But I made a guess at all of these. Again, I'm speculating into the future. What might this stuff look like? And then I'm asking for reaction. So the next series of sessions that we're having is with subject matter experts coming in from each one of those domains. And I'm saying, are these the right things that we should be paying attention to? Are these capacities right? Are all these elements within the capacities the right thing? Can we measure these things? Have we ever measured these things before? And what might that look like? And the goal is to have a first assessment ready to be able to run this program through a pilot city, most likely in the next year. We're working on raising capital to make that happen, because this is, as I tell Gail often with this work, this is just a shitty first draft. There's a lot of refinement that has to happen with this, but this is that beginning work. One of the things is, as designers, I think you would do yourself well in doing, and I know my experience with a lot of Gale students, this has been the case. When you hit a moment of ambiguity, to be able to step across the void of not having clear direction and just taking an action and trying something, even though it might be absolutely the wrong thing, sometimes just trying something and giving folk an opportunity to react to it because they can't imagine what the next phase themselves might look like is a huge, huge value. I'm so appreciative of Gale students that we've hired into the business or contracted in, have had that ability, and we try to do this with all of our work. So this feels like an educated guess. There's more data and stuff behind it now as it continues to build, but this is still just fodder for really smart folk, really impassioned folk, really experienced folk to say, is this a new way that we can kind of consider moving, accessibility and inclusion forward? Is it a model in the language that we can use on a larger scale? So that's my answer to how might we create roadmaps for inclusion. The idea on each one of these, if we can say where a city is, we can give them an idea of what the next steps are. And I think that's the kind of leadership cities, large organizations are looking for. They want to be led. So.
Can we ask questions?
Yeah, please ask questions.
As a person who I'm sure people think excels at creating ambiguity class, you're welcome. It's interesting to me that there are other sort of nuggets of conversations around city development that this could thread into or through. And I'm wondering, in the space of benchmarks or best practices, have you looked at things like, because I know you have smart cities, the 15-minute city, some of these other strategies around urban planning that this could be leveraged with?
We have, again, this is a small project, so more time for deeper research, more bringing in people who are already experts in spaces is a part of that. Is a part of that process, not only to answer those kinds of questions, but also to get the right kind of buy-in to make some of this happen. Right now, the feedback that we've gotten is that a lot of existing programs and benchmarks in each of those domains could cleanly fit into a larger roadmap like this, which essentially means to me that cities, if they've already made investments in some places, can continue to leverage those investments. And so a lot of what this does is just gets your arms wrapped around the entirety of what is moving towards beyond ADA compliance look like.
Where, if at all, does homeless, anti-homeless, city infrastructure kind of fall into this? Is that even a
Yeah, so that comes into conversation around housing, around housing and accessibility of housing, both from an affordability perspective and from an inventory perspective, as well as policy around that. That is a conversation. All of this lens is still focused on accessibility, but like homelessness as a symptom of accessibility issues are definitely a part of this. Yeah.
And that's where you would engage subject matter experts who are doing big work in that space, like Orion Kilpatrick and
Yep.
Central East Task Force and
Yep.
other people.
Yep. Yeah.
When you realized that they were not necessarily looking to be part of the early part of the conversation, and so you lean towards making a plan, how do you balance or approach if they realize that they are not the experts, but you're also trying to consider what direction they want to go in? How do you balance your influence in terms of like maybe they're 10% away from this one objective versus this other one, but it's not what they want to lean towards? So do you try to influence that push because you realize that they're capable of doing that versus something else?
If I understand the question right, my answer is I don't know. So we haven't run a pilot on this yet. I would surmise, though, that during the assessment phase, we would be very clear about how far away folk are from the next step, or hey, do this one thing. It could be a really big thing. Do this one thing and move. It'll move you to the next phase. And by the way, I didn't mention this too. There is thinking that this would turn into a certification of some kind. So a city would be like the process, right? The city would be stamped with a Access Collaborative, we're an emerging community kind of a thing that they could use to promote.
And then likely you're still not done.
Right.
Because you have to keep that certification relevant.
You got to keep the certification relevant, and as you move down the path, you not only have to do the thing in the integrated capacity, but I got to do the things before, because everything's got to build on it, right? There should be a logic to the whole piece. I think what would happen though, I can't imagine in an engagement with like a city that they'd be like, yeah, we're going to invest in movement in every single one of these domains. I think in the futures thinking process and helping them kind of create priorities, they're going to pick and choose a handful. And there may be low-hanging fruit that's like 10% away. You should work on this because that would be really great. But we would be working with their community to help to identify what those priorities are. And then hopefully, like when you get to like the measure phase, you'd go back and you'd be like, hey, you moved some progress on this. Let's work on transportation now, right? You decided not to. Let's bring this other one along, and we'd continue to kind of recommend that they touch every single one of those domains. Yeah.
So if I'm gonna understand right, you're working on the macro level of the city-wise, not the micro of each individual business.
Right.
Are you having conversations with businesses as well to incorporate some of these ideas so that obviously the city doesn't have to fix it? We have the businesses fix it first?
So, yes and no. So on the macro side of things, yes, we're looking at cities, but we're also having some conversations with other large institutions. So it could be, a big corporation that has a lot of influence, and like we've seen with, at least to a certain extent, around sustainability, if you're demanding of your suppliers, particular practices and quality, I can see that extended into a city so that there's a bit of a ripple effect in that way. There is natural work that's already being done through disability advocates at an individual business level though too, doing assessments of, restaurants downtown. So you're working with the smaller one. So I'm hoping what this does is it takes the more focused work that a Center for Independent Living is doing and gives it an opportunity to be magnified. I'm hoping this kind of stuff is a force multiplier to the work that they're doing. Yeah. There's an interplay here. I'm not exactly sure how that works yet.
And we chatted a little earlier about institutions like a Corewell Health or University of Michigan, who have legs in multiple communities. That it does make, they would absolutely make a change. It would affect all of the communities. It would only focus on one community, right? So that's how business can really make impact.
Yeah, I could see working with like a Corewell or a University of Michigan, and them making decisions on next community that they make an investment in based on all of these kinds of qualities, right?
And there's already a shared value, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So Bill, I love your naive optimism, and I think that's one thing that's really important in terms of being a designer that maintains curiosity throughout the practice. On a more personal note with this project, is there anything that has surprised you or delighted you, good, bad, that was unexpected perhaps?
The biggest thing that surprised me in this whole thing is that no one said no yet. I mean, honestly, that first project where we recommended that map, that was a $10,000 project. We didn't have a lot of time into it. This kind of creating frameworks like that is usually a lot more time, and it's it feels like it's something that it's the time for. And I think like a lot of things, I was reflecting on this with Art Prize happening. Like, Art Prize was successful because right place, right time. It didn't happen in 2009 when the economy was bad and people were like looking for interesting things to do where they weren't spending any money. It wouldn't have happened the way that it did. And I think there's a lot to be said about right place and time for this too. Dave says that he's getting a lot of folks saying, it's about time. And he's like, no, it's not about time. It's about time. It's time. The time is right to be moving forward in our conversations around accessibility.
And the language is really relevant. You haven't spoken maybe enough about language, but I don't know what that is. So a lot of such class. It's about time. When you say that, you're sort of dissing somebody, right?
Right.
You're shaming somebody. You take the about out. It's more proactive and energizing statement. And we lean in a lot on language around here, and I think you are one of the masters of language. By the way, Bill has a background in philosophy. So there's that. Your master's is on design.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have. Depending on the audience, I still hesitantly refer to myself as a designer, even though that's like 100% of the work that I'm doing. But yeah, I'm a philosopher by trade and was a chef at one point.
And that's the point, is that level of diversity is really relevant to you.
Yeah.
The language is so carefully thought through.
Well, and that's this institutional capacity piece. Where is it?
And if you all have to go to class, I get it. We just
Yeah.
might still stay and talk for a while.
We did create around language, and I think this is going to get blown up to kind of the rest of the work, but this design criteria for the stages. We heard over and over again through folks with the Centers for Independent Living, conversations with Dave and the team at Disability Advocates, and even the subject matter experts. When you're creating language for these stages, it it has to fulfill these things. It's, like I said before, it's got to be celebratory and not punitive. It's got to be accessible and strategic. It's got to be language that, you know, resonates with folk emotionally, but also is like really practical from an implementation perspective. It's got to be consistent across all of those domains too. It's got to like, it has to naturally fit in the language of those domains, from housing to communication, right? I mentioned narrative driven. I think all of this has to be narrative driven. The narrative, we all know how important the narrative is. And this is like potentially like a really complex framework that I wouldn't be able to keep I can't keep all of this in my head, but I got little narratives, I got little stories that I can put in my pocket, right? That are easy, they're pithy, I can remember them, and I think they're easily, what's the word that I want to say? Well, yeah, they're digestible. They can be transported, you know, to people, and easily adopted. This has got to be like an ongoing cyclical framework too. So everything builds. Once you finish emerging, you're not really finished with emerging. You're still doing that same work, and you're just building on it, right? And that it's got to be auditable and actionable. So everything has to have like a clear, what do I do about that? You know, I hear people are still saying X from a lived experience perspective. What do I do about that? Well, here's your plan. And so I think that kind of language is going to have to be baked into kind of the rest of everything as we've been thinking about it too. So.
Yay to big ideas.
Yay to big ideas. Yep.
At this point, give a quick round of applause for coming out and talking with us. Coolest project ever. It's very exciting. Please remember to submit some work for the student exhibition.
You
and
have lots of
faculty
walls, they
exhibition.
need to be coolly activated.
Yeah, and sorry, I forgot to mention, please come in some other time when you're not in class and fill out some sticky notes and answer some of the questions we have on the banners up on the walls.
If you have ideas for the speakers, we want to know those.
Yeah.
And don't leave without taking more food with you.
That too.